This is part 3 of the chapter 4 video lecture. I just restarted this because I started rambling on and geeking out about language, and I figured you guys didn't need to hear too much of that in this week. We're going to talk about 3 schools of linguistics that are kind of schools of thought as to how we get meaning from words. So how do we go from that word on the page or that word that I'm speaking right now to meaning from it? And the 3 we're going to look at are semantics, pragmatics, and sociolinguistics, and these are in the book. Semantics says that meaning comes from the words themselves and how they are arranged in a sentence. You might have heard someone say rather derisively, it's just semantics, when they're to say arguing a technicality. But semantics is really about the study of the definition of words, and the way that we put words together to get grammar and to get meaning in that unit, that one sentence or that one word. Pragmatics is a little bit bigger. Pragmatics says that meaning comes from how words are positioned in a conversation and in the communication context. So it's not zooming in on the meaning of the word. It's not zooming in just on the meaning of the sentence. Things like body language, things like the words that someone says to you and how you respond bring meaning to those words and bring situation to them. And sociolinguistics says that meaning comes from how words are interpreted within a larger context of a culture and its values. So meaning comes from cultural priorities, not just from personal communication or just the meaning of the words themselves. This is just a tiny part of the huge field that is linguistics. Linguistics is impossibly large, and it is actually only a very small portion of the field of English. People tell me they struggle with English, and I think to myself, well, yeah, it's not something anyone could master in one lifetime. There is just so much there. So we're only talking about a couple little things. This is my favorite field, historical linguistics, which has to do with how languages change over time. And you probably have noticed that with my references to the ancient world. But yeah, these are all many of the fields of linguistics. So let's go back to talking about the ways we gain meaning from language or from speech. So semantics says that meaning is derived from the words themselves and how they are arranged in a sentence. Literal meanings of words often. You're not talking about connotations here most of the time, because connotations would be gaining meaning from context. You're talking about what it says in the dictionary. What do you probably mean when you ask, what does this word mean? Yeah, you're asking semantics there. There are 2 types of meaning that words can have. There is the denotative meaning, which is the literal dictionary definition, and there's the connotative meaning, which is an implicit association. So one way I like to explain it is that someone who is stubborn and someone who is persistent are the same person. The words stubborn and persistent basically mean the same thing, right? But stubborn has a negative connotation. We think of that as unnecessarily not moving forward, and persistent has a positive connotation. You're continuing to persevere even in the face of obstacles and challenges. But in both cases, you have someone pushing forward and continuing even in difficult situations, or even when maybe they should stop. So the 2 words, stubborn and persistent, do mean the same thing, but the difference in how we register them, what we think of a person described with those words, is the connotation. So to improve semantics is about improving the clarity of your word meaning and your grammar. So making sure that what you say is clear, concise, easily understood in a very literal way by your audience. And you can improve it by using specific and precise language, concrete language that appeals to sensory details, by using familiar language. Don't use words that your audience may not know, and use inclusive language that is unlikely to alienate or offend. Those are all ways that you can improve the clarity of the writing itself within your speeches. So pragmatics is another school of thought that says that we derive meaning from interpreting words within the conversational context. So rather than what the word means, which is semantics, it asks what the person means. So instead of what does this word mean, it's what do you, the person speaking, mean. And it interprets speech acts. Speech acts are utterances of verbal messages by a speaker. Wow, that's a lot of typos. By a speaker and what it implies about how the speaker should respond. That includes what the speaker is doing as well as what is being said and contextual messages. So the fact that my hands are bouncing around while I'm saying this rather than just staring at the computer and reading directly, that probably tells you that I like this stuff. I'm excited about it. This is interesting to me. So that's kind of something that would be with pragmatics. To improve pragmatics, you want to make sure that the words in context are being interpreted as intended. So this is an example from talking online rather than talking in person. But when it is a form of speech. We process text messages and direct messages as a written form of speech, not as written language. It's a weird quirk in our brains. So you may have had the experience of someone ending the last line of a text message with a period. And people perceive that as aggressive or negative, even if it is technically correct. So when you're talking online, you actually want to not end your statement in a period, because if you end it in a period, that signals that you've stopped the conversation. You want to leave the conversation open. And so that would be an example of how you might use pragmatics in online conversations. Other ways to improve pragmatics in spoken conversation: you want to tell the truth. That way there's not a hidden message to interpret. You don't want to have your audience thinking there's a whole lot of levels that they need to be digging into if there's not, because then that undermines your authority and they're less likely to trust you. You also want to provide the right amount of information. That's tricky, but it should fully answer the question or cover the material, but not say much more than that. I'm failing at that in this video lecture because I keep going off on linguistic tangents, and I'm sorry about that. It is a passion of mine, and sometimes it's a little bit hard for me to brain myself in. And you want to connect your speech act to the topic at hand to prevent misinterpretation, to prevent people from thinking you mean something you don't. The third school of thought is sociolinguistics. Sociolinguistics says meaning is derived from the norms of a culture or a co-culture, and it studies the relationship between language and society. In other words, how do members of a society use the language in a unique way in order to communicate? The cultures assign different meanings to words, where the meaning may differ from a semantic meaning, meaning your cultural meaning may be different than the literal meaning. Idioms are also a pretty common use in cultures. These are expressions whose meaning is different from the meaning of the words in them. So if I said he kicked the bucket, I don't mean he literally took a bucket on the floor and kicked it. I mean he died. Another example that might be more familiar: bless his little heart. It's a Southern phrase that we use, and it literally means, oh, I wish him the best. But anyone who has heard that phrase knows that's probably not what the person actually means. It is a very insulting phrase that many people use. Slang is also often a part of sociolinguistics, a very fascinating part. So is profanity. Profanity is absolutely fascinating to look into. Etiquette and the social rules of conduct also govern meaning. So if someone says, have a nice day, though they might actually mean here's a better one. How are you doing? Someone asked you how you're doing. Well, the kind of social rules are you say you're doing well no matter how you're doing. And sociolinguistics is how we know that you are not really supposed to say, oh my God, I'm having a crappy day. Preferred verbal style is different in different societies. So in American, we tend to like more direct verbal style. It's open and unambiguous, where we don't have to read a lot through between the lines. In other cultures, they prefer more indirect, which is less overt, more, you have to interpret more context clues to understand the meaning of a more indirect verbal style. So to improve sociolinguistics, the goal is to improve intercultural communication and reduce misunderstanding based on cultural differences, because remember, this is looking at meaning from the cultural level. And the ways we do this are by developing intercultural competence, practicing mindfulness, and respecting and adapting to the sociolinguistic practices of others. These are all easier said than done, but they're basically, they kind of boil down to be self-aware and be empathetic. I know that these can be challenging. Let me find the pages in the book. There are some really good examples in the book, but I didn't want to just sit here and read from it because I felt like that would be not particularly helpful for you. Okay. On pages 71 and 72, we have some good examples of what semantics is and how syntax and grammar can change the meaning of words. So when he went to the pound, he adopted a 3-pound puppy. He went to the pound and adopted a 3-pound puppy, or upon arriving at the pound, he adopted a 3-pound puppy. The three sentences literally would mean the same thing, but the meaning changes slightly based on the words that are used. If you delete one word, he, the 3-pound adopted puppy, went to the pound, you get a completely different meaning. Instead of someone adopting the puppy is the one going to the pound. So that is semantics. On pages 74 and 75, you have a good example of pragmatics. So you have Harry calling 3 people and saying the same sentence. In phone call 1, he calls Katie and says, the car won't start. Katie knows from the relationship that she has from Harry what she needs to say next. So she says, sorry about that, I'll just take the bus. So then Harry makes another call, this time to a AAA customer service representative, and he says the exact same thing, the car won't start. But the AAA service customer representative, interpreting the context, says, where is the car, sir? I'll send a tow truck right away. Then he calls the previous owner who sold the car to him and says the same thing. The car won't start. The previous owner goes, wow, that never happened to me, but I told you I was selling the car as is. So he also knows what the complaint is, and he kind of anticipates it. That same sentence having 3 different meanings to 3 different people is pragmatics. It's anticipating the social situation. And on page 76 and 77, we have a good example of sociolinguistics. So Jorge says to Sam, are you driving home for Thanksgiving? But he means maybe he'll give me a ride. Sam says yes, and thinks to himself, if he wanted a ride, he'd ask. Kevin says, well, I'd like a ride home. Sam says, sure, no problem. Jorge goes, are you taking anyone else? Meaning, I wonder if he has room for me. And Sam says, no, I'm leaving early after my last class and not coming back until late Sunday evening, assuming that Jorge already has a ride home. And Jorge just says, well, enjoy Thanksgiving, and says, if he wanted to give me a ride, I gave him plenty of opportunities to offer. So within those, you have the rules of etiquette are governing what people say. And that is sociolinguistics right there. So I wanted to I normally don't go to the book much, but I thought it was a good idea just to kind of recap that a little bit. And that brings us to the end of the Chapter 4 video lectures. So I look forward to seeing your speeches in a few days, and I hope you guys have a great day.